The Disappearance at Midnight Ferry. Chapter 1, The Empty Berth. The evening was one of those strange autumn nights when the air carries both the crispness of frost and the wet heaviness of the lake. I had just returned from a long day in my Chicago office when the telegram arrived. The words, though hastily scrawled, bore the kind of weight I had learned never to ignore. Urgent, Merchant Silas Abernathy missing from Midnight Ferry, Detroit to Buffalo. Wife requests your service immediately. Come at once. The message was signed by a solicitor I knew by reputation, a cautious man not given to extravagance. I sat at my desk, the office lamp burning low, and read the telegram again. A missing man was no novelty in my career, but a wealthy grain merchant vanishing without trace from a crowded ferry suggested something larger than ordinary misadventure. Silas Abernathy was known in trade circles as both respected and resented. His dealings in grain speculation had earned him wealth, and with wealth came both enemies and obligations. Yet to disappear in such a fashion, leaving behind luggage, berth, and ledger, was unusual even for the most desperate debtor. The following afternoon I was on the train to Detroit, carrying only my worn valise and my ever-present notebook. The rhythm of the wheels against the track lulled me into a state of alert contemplation. Cases such as these rarely presented the truth on their face. One had to sift through rumor, deception, and fear before reaching the core. I resolved, before stepping foot on the ferry docks, that I would treat every man and woman I encountered as both potential witness and possible deceiver. Detroit greeted me with the smell of smoke and lake water, a combination that clung to the lungs. The ferry slip bustled with activity, though beneath the surface I sensed unease. The steamer Crescent Star, the very vessel Abernathy had boarded, was docked again at its berth, readying for another crossing. Its decks creaked with cargo, its funnels exhaled coal smoke, and its gangways swarmed with porters and passengers. I sought out the purser, a man named Hammond, whose thin face suggested both suspicion and sleeplessness. He recalled Abernathy boarding the ferry late, a heavy overcoat thrown over his frame, a leather case in hand. Hammond had assigned him to a private berth, cabin number 4 on the starboard side. And when morning came? I asked. The berth was as you see now, Hammond replied, handing me the cabin key. His bag on the rack, his coat folded over the chair, his papers open on the desk. But no man. Not a trace. The cabin itself was as the purser had described. I took note of the details with care, the leather valise untouched, clothing folded neatly inside, a pair of boots resting by the bunk, soles damp but not muddy, and upon the desk, a ledger book left open to a page filled with figures and symbols. The ink had dried mid-sentence, the quill still resting askew, as though Abernathy had been interrupted in the very act of writing. There was no sign of struggle, no overturned chair, no spilled ink, no disturbance of the bunk. If a man had been taken by force, his captors had done their work with ghostly precision. Stepping back into the corridor, I questioned the steward assigned to the cabins. He recalled Abernathy requesting hot tea shortly after departure. The steward had delivered it, finding the merchant hunched over his ledger. That was the last confirmed sighting. No other passenger remembered seeing Abernathy on deck or in the saloon as the night wore on. I then turned to the deckhands, men rough of speech but observant in their own way. One mentioned hearing a splash in the small hours, heavier than the ordinary slap of water against hull. Another swore he glimpsed a shadow moving near the stern rail, though the night was thick with fog and lantern light was poor. Such testimonies were worth recording, yet unreliable in their vagueness. By dusk I had gathered enough fragments to sketch the outline of the puzzle. A man in possession of wealth, last seen alone in his cabin, vanished without leaving a trace of exit. A splash in the night hinted at drowning, yet why would Abernathy step onto the deck in bitter cold unless lured or forced? The ledger, with its strange notations, suggested affairs more complicated than grain shipments. That evening I visited the Abernathy residence in Detroit. Mrs. Abernathy, pale and drawn, greeted me with the fragile composure of a woman balancing fear with dignity. She insisted her husband had no reason to flee, his business, though entangled with rivals, was prosperous. Yet when pressed, she admitted whispers of debts and partnerships less than legal, names spoken in low tones around the dinner table, shipments unrecorded in official ledgers. She clutched my arm with sudden intensity. "Mr. Pinkerton, he is not a man to abandon his family. If he vanished, it was not by his own will. Promise me you will find the truth." I assured her that I would, though in my heart I knew truth is often murkier than justice. Her eyes followed me as I left, filled with both hope and dread. Back at my lodging, I opened my notebook and copied the strange symbols from Abernathy's ledger. They resembled neither common bookkeeping shorthand nor merchant ciphers I had seen before. Yet the repetition of certain marks suggested a code, one I was determined to break. As midnight struck, I stood by my window overlooking the ferry slip. The crescent star was again preparing to sail, her whistle echoing across the dark water. Somewhere in that vast expanse lay either the body of Silas Abernathy or the trail of his escape. Whether victim or fugitive, he had left behind more questions than answers. I closed my notebook and extinguished the lamp. Tomorrow would demand sharper eyes and steadier nerves. For the moment, the lake kept its secrets, as it always had. Chapter 2, Whispers on the Dock. Morning broke over Detroit with a grim, steel-colored sky that seemed to press low upon the city. Smoke from the factories mingled with the mist rolling off the water, casting the docks in a pall that suited the mystery at hand. I rose early, notebook in my pocket, determined to trace the movements of every soul who might have seen or spoken with Silas Abernathy before his vanishing. Cases are never solved from behind a desk. The cobblestones, the taverns, the damp planks of the wharf are the detective's true office. The ferry slip was alive with its usual confusion, porters jostling for position, women clutching parasols against the lake breeze, laborers hauling sacks of grain. Yet beneath the noise, I detected an undercurrent of unease. The news of Abernathy's disappearance had spread. Sailors and dockhands whispered in low tones, glancing over shoulders as though the lake itself might overhear them. I began with the men who loaded cargo that night. A broad-shouldered fellow named McCreary, his face half hidden beneath a thick beard, admitted seeing Abernathy converse with a stranger near the boarding ramp. "Tall feller," he said, scratching at his whiskers. "Wore a bowler hat pulled low. Carried a carpet bag. Didn't hand over no ticket when he went aboard, neither. Slipped past in the crowd while the purser was busy." This intrigued me. An unrecorded passenger could explain much. I pressed McCreary for detail, but he shook his head. "Too dark. Too many folks boarding at once. But I'll swear by St. Peter that man weren't on the manifest." Further along the pier, an old deckhand named O'Rourke leaned on a coil of rope, his eyes red-rimmed from sleeplessness. When asked about the night in question, he muttered of a sound that haunted him still. "It were near 2 bells past midnight," he rasped. "I heard it clear as thunder, a splash, heavy as a horse dropping into the water. Thought at first it was cargo shifted overboard. But no alarm was raised, and the watch said nothing. I tell you plain, Mr. Pinkerton, a man went into that lake." I recorded his words carefully. Testimonies of splashes at sea are common, yet rarely conclusive. Still, the detail fit with the absence of Abernathy come morning. To widen the circle, I sought out the taverns that huddled near the dockside, places where tongues loosened with whiskey. In a dim establishment called the Sailor's Rest, I found 2 men nursing morning mugs. They claimed to have seen Abernathy in heated discussion with another merchant 3 nights before his disappearance. The quarrel, they said, centered on debts unpaid and grain shipments diverted. One insisted the other man swore vengeance, though such oaths are easily spoken in drink. By mid-afternoon I had gathered a patchwork of rumor. Abernathy had enemies in trade, possibly dangerous ones. He was shadowed by a mysterious stranger in a bowler hat, and he may have gone overboard in the night, whether by his own step or another's hand. Yet none of it formed a solid line. In detective work, hearsay must be tested like ore in fire, most crumbles to dust. I returned to the Crescent Star, walking its decks in daylight, studying every rail and stair. At the stern, near where O'Rourke claimed to hear the splash, I found fresh gouges in the wooden railing, as though something heavy had scraped over. I ran my fingers over the marks, considering whether a body could be forced across silently. The lake was merciless. If Abernathy had gone into those waters, he would not rise again. Still, something in me resisted closing the case so neatly. The purser Hammond joined me, his nervous manner unchanged. "You've stirred the whole wharf with questions," he complained. "Folk are saying Abernathy drowned himself to escape creditors. Others say smugglers took him. None know the truth, and all are uneasy." "Uneasy men reveal more than calm ones," I replied. "Let them whisper. Whispers often lead to truth." That evening I returned to my lodging and spread before me the notes of the day. At the center lay the enigma of the bowler-hatted man. If he had indeed boarded without ticket, then either the purser was negligent, or someone aided his entry. The stranger's presence linked directly to Abernathy's last known movements, for multiple witnesses recalled them together. Who was he? Business rival? Smuggling partner? Hired hand? I turned next to the ledger copied from Abernathy's cabin. The symbols still mocked me with their secrecy. But cross-referencing figures with shipping reports revealed irregularities, shipments of grain supposedly bound for New York that vanished mid-route, payments recorded in amounts too round, too consistent, to be honest trade. It suggested clandestine dealings, possibly with Canadian interests across the lake. If so, then Abernathy's disappearance might be the result of betrayal within such illicit circles. I slept little that night. My dreams were filled with the imagined splash of a man striking cold water, the ripples widening under moonlight. I awoke before dawn resolved to chase the trail further east, toward Buffalo. If the bowler-hatted stranger had indeed left Detroit aboard the ferry, then traces of him might be found there, goosehouses, pawnshops, taverns. Men who travel under cover of darkness often leave small footprints in daylight. Before departing, I paid another visit to Mrs. Abernathy. She received me in her sitting room, hands clasped tightly in her lap. When I described the possibility of her husband's dealings with smugglers, her lips pressed thin, but she did not deny it. "He was a good man at heart," she whispered. "But good men are sometimes drawn into shadows when profit beckons. If he did wrong, it was from ambition, not cruelty. Yet I know this, he would not abandon me willingly. If he is gone, it was by another's design." Her words hardened my resolve. The case was no longer merely one of professional duty, it was bound by the plea of a wife determined not to believe in desertion. As the day closed, I stood again upon the dock, watching the Crescent Star depart on its nightly voyage. Lanterns flickered along her rails, casting long, wavering shadows across the black water. Somewhere out there lay the truth, whether Abernathy drowned, fled, or was concealed. I pulled my coat tighter against the wind. Tomorrow I would follow the same path Abernathy had taken, across the lake to Buffalo, where fresh whispers might rise. Until then, the lake guarded its secrets jealously, and the city of Detroit offered only rumor in place of fact. Chapter 3, The Ledger of Secrets. The ferry crossing to Buffalo was long and restless. Lake Erie stretched in every direction, its dark surface flecked with whitecaps that slapped against the hull like muted drumbeats. I sat alone in the saloon with Abernathy's copied ledger pages before me, a candle guttering low on the table. Around me, passengers conversed in hushed tones, gamblers shuffled cards, and the occasional clatter of cutlery echoed from the galley. Yet my mind was not with them, it was entangled in the ciphered markings of a man who had disappeared as though swallowed whole. The symbols at first appeared meaningless, loops and crossbars, odd triangles beside numbers. But years of detective work had taught me that men who deal in secrets often choose code simple enough for memory, yet obscure to the uninitiated. I began comparing entries. One recurring triangle mark appeared alongside figures of 3 or 4 barrels, often paired with abbreviated place names. Another symbol, resembling an inverted V, always aligned with sums of money. Slowly, the structure revealed itself. Abernathy's ledger did not record grain shipments at all, but contraband. Smuggling was no novelty on the Great Lakes. Whiskey from Canada, untaxed and in demand, flowed across the water beneath cover of darkness. To find a grain merchant tied to such traffic, however, complicated matters. Abernathy was no mere investor, his ledger suggested active participation. He had concealed operations under the guise of ordinary trade, using coded symbols where official records demanded honesty. The conclusion was unsettling. Abernathy had entangled himself with men whose livelihoods thrived on secrecy and whose punishment for betrayal was ruthless. As dawn rose over Buffalo, the crescent star slid into its berth. The city greeted me with the usual press of carriages, dockside warehouses, and cries of laborers unloading cargo. I wasted no time, setting about inquiries with the methodical patience upon which my reputation depended. First I sought out the Buffalo police, men with whom I had worked before. They were wary of smuggling cases, bribes flowed easily, and investigations often vanished into silence. Still, I learned from a cooperative sergeant that certain warehouses by the canal were known meeting places for whiskey traffickers. More interesting still, a stranger matching McCreary's description, a tall man in a bowler hat carrying a carpetbag, had been seen near those very warehouses 2 nights past. With this lead, I turned my steps toward the canal district. The streets grew narrower, the air thick with the smell of tar, grain, and stagnant water. I found a tavern frequented by laborers and smugglers alike. There I adopted the role of a weary traveler, buying a round of drinks and listening more than I spoke. In time, talk turned to a merchant from Detroit who had lost his way in the lake. One man laughed bitterly, saying he wished he could vanish as neatly whenever creditors pressed too hard. Another muttered that Abernathy had crossed the wrong men and paid the price. I leaned forward, affecting casual curiosity. What wrong men might those be? I asked. The speaker, a wiry fellow with a scar across his cheek, narrowed his eyes. Strangers don't ask questions here, friend. Best drink your whiskey and keep your ears closed. I did as advised, but the exchange confirmed what I suspected. Abernathy's dealings tied directly to Buffalo's smuggling rings. Later that evening, I reviewed the ledger again in my lodging. With each comparison, clarity sharpened. The triangle symbol, I now believed, marked barrels of contraband whiskey. Place abbreviations pointed to delivery docks, BF for Buffalo Ferry, CH for Cleveland Harbor, and others scattered along the lakeshore. The inverted V marked sums of profit. Abernathy had amassed a fortune in shadow trade, all while maintaining the appearance of a respectable merchant. But a final discovery unsettled me further. At the bottom of the last page he had written half a phrase before his ink dried: meeting, MH, Ferry night, payment to. The words trailed into nothing, but enough remained to suggest he had arranged a clandestine meeting the very night of his disappearance. The initials, MH, might be the name or alias of his contact. I slept little. The more I uncovered, the less clear the path became. Had Abernathy been abducted by smugglers to whom he owed money? Had he been silenced for plotting betrayal? Or had he staged his own vanishing, leaving clues scattered like crumbs to mislead pursuers? The next day I took to the docks again, searching for traces of the bowler-hatted stranger. A pawnbroker near the canal recalled a man fitting the description pawning a silver watch. Its initials, curiously, matched Silas Abernathy's. The pawnbroker, suspicious of the transaction, had noted the time, early morning after the ferry docked. That detail was crucial. If Abernathy's possessions were already being pawned in Buffalo, then either he himself had traded them under disguise, or another carried the spoils of his demise. I traced further inquiries to a small guesthouse on Canal Street. The landlady, a stout woman with sharp eyes, confirmed the stranger rented a room briefly, paid in cash, and departed before dawn. She remembered him muttering in agitation about the lake keeping its bargains. The phrase, echoed now by two different witnesses, sent a chill through me. It suggested ritual, secrecy, perhaps even superstition among the smugglers. By evening I returned to my lodging, notes piled high before me. Each piece of testimony, each ciphered entry, each rumor pointed in one direction. Abernathy had been entangled with ruthless men, and those men had either disposed of him or concealed him for their own ends. Yet the possibility lingered that Abernathy himself had orchestrated the affair, slipping away under a false identity, his ledger abandoned as decoy. I could not yet decide. But my instinct told me that the truth lay within reach, hidden among Buffalo's warehouses and canal-side dealings. If Abernathy lived, he was close. If dead, his killers still haunted these streets. As the lamps were lit along the canal, their reflections rippling across black water, I closed the ledger and locked it in my valise. The symbols had revealed much, but not enough. The next step demanded confrontation, not with paper, but with men. Somewhere in Buffalo, the bowler-hatted stranger waited. And with him, perhaps, the key to whether Silas Abernathy was fugitive, victim, or something far stranger. Chapter 4, The Man in the Bowler Hat. The trail of the bowler-hatted stranger had become the only firm thread in a tangle of rumor. Each clue, pawned watch, muttered phrases, hasty lodgings, drew me deeper into Buffalo's underbelly. If Abernathy's fate was tied to anyone, it was to this man who seemed to follow him like a shadow across the lake. I began the morning with a walk along Canal Street, notebook in hand, asking questions of dockhands, fishmongers, and carters. Most professed ignorance, but one ragged boy who swept the tavern stoop claimed to have seen a tall man with a bowler enter the pawn shop the very day Abernathy vanished. The boy remembered the stranger's hands trembling as he passed the watch across the counter. "He looked scared, mister," the boy said. "Like a cat with dogs at its tail." Kept glancing toward the water. That image fixed itself in my mind, a nervous figure, clutching Abernathy's property, eyes drawn always back to the lake. My next call was the city registry. Few lodgings kept thorough records, but occasionally an alias betrayed itself. At the Canal Street guesthouse, the landlady had recorded only the name Henry Moore. Such a name was common enough to be meaningless. Still, I copied it into my book. False names often reappeared like bad pennies. By afternoon I had resolved to visit the warehouses near the grain silos, places whispered to be used by smugglers. The buildings stood vast and echoing, timbered walls rising above cobbled yards, the air heavy with the scent of grain dust and damp wood. Many were idle, but signs of nocturnal activity were evident. Boot marks in mud, lanterns soot upon beams, and discarded cigar ends ground into the floor. Inside one half-abandoned structure I found more than traces. A coil of rope lay near the water's edge, its end darkened with stains I suspected to be blood. Footprints led to a side door opening upon the canal, as though something, or someone, had been dragged. The scene told its own grim story. Abernathy may well have been held here, bargaining for his life. As I examined the rope, a voice startled me. "You're sniffing where it ain't safe, mister." I turned to find a wiry man watching from the doorway, eyes narrowed. He carried no weapon in sight, but menace clung to his posture. "I seek only truth," I said evenly. "The truth of a merchant vanished on the lake. Perhaps you know him, Silas Abernathy." The man spat. "Know him? I know he played both sides. Thought he could cheat men who live by the water. The lake takes such men." He turned as if to leave, but I stepped forward, blocking his path. "And the man in the bowler hat? Does the lake take him too?" For an instant his composure faltered. His lips twisted into something between smirk and snarl. "Best you forget that one, detective. He's marked." Before I could press further, he slipped past into the street, vanishing among the warehouse shadows. I did not pursue. Sometimes pursuit scatters truth like frightened birds. Better to let the man run and remember his words, "He's marked." That evening I dined at a modest inn, my thoughts circling the stranger. If he was marked, it meant the smugglers considered him compromised, perhaps guilty of betrayal, perhaps dangerous with knowledge. He might be victim as much as villain. Yet his possession of Abernathy's watch bound him tightly to the disappearance. To advance the matter, I turned again to official channels. I spoke with a constable of Buffalo familiar with canal crime. He recalled recent arrests of whiskey runners, most of whom whispered of an accountant-turned-smuggler who kept their ledgers clean. This man, they said, was clever with figures but weak of nerve. He went always by aliases, one of which was Moore. The constable, lowering his voice, added, "They say he feared Abernathy. Claimed the merchant meant to expose him, then take the profits for himself. If Abernathy's gone, it might be on account of Moore saving his own skin." The puzzle sharpened. Could the bowler-hatted man, this so-called Moore, have killed Abernathy to protect himself? Or had the smugglers set both men against each other, watching as ambition consumed them? The following night I walked the canal under moonlight, the mist rising thick off the water. From the shadows I spied a small gathering near a moored barge, 4 men unloading barrels. Among them, unmistakable, stood the tall figure in the bowler hat. His nervous gestures betrayed him even at distance. I remained hidden, observing. He spoke rapidly, hands darting, while the others responded with grim silence. Then, without warning, one seized his lapels and shoved him hard against the barge. The sound of muffled argument carried across the water. I could not hear words, but their meaning was plain. Moore was not trusted. When at last the men dispersed, Moore slunk alone toward the alleys, his bowler pulled low, shoulders hunched. I followed at distance until he entered another tavern, its windows glowing faintly through smoke. Inside, I approached cautiously. He sat in the corner, nursing a glass with shaking hands. His eyes darted across the room, never resting. I slid into the seat opposite him without invitation. "You've been carrying a heavy burden, Mr. Moore," I said quietly. "A burden shaped like a silver watch and a missing merchant." His glass froze halfway to his lips. For a heartbeat he looked ready to flee, but then his shoulders sagged. "You don't know what you're asking, detective," he whispered. "Some truths sink with the lake. Best let them." But Abernathy's wife does not let them. Nor do I. "Tell me what happened on that ferry night." He shook his head, eyes wide. "If I speak, I'm finished. They'll tie me to the stones and roll me in. The lake keeps its bargains." I leaned forward. "Then make a new bargain. With me. Speak, and perhaps you save yourself." For a long while he said nothing, knuckles white around his glass. At last he whispered, "Meet me tomorrow, at the old warehouse by the silos. I'll tell you what I know. But come alone." I studied him carefully. It might be a trap, or it might be the first crack in a wall of silence. Either way, it was the next step. Leaving him there in the smoky tavern, I walked back through Buffalo's streets with caution. The case was no longer a question of drowning or escape, it was entangled in betrayals among men who dealt in shadow trade. And at the center stood the nervous figure in the bowler hat, a man who knew the truth yet trembled beneath its weight. Tomorrow, at the silos, that truth would either reveal itself, or vanish with me into the lake's black depths. Chapter 5, The House by the Grain Silos. The next morning dawned with a veil of fog drifting off the canal, curling like smoke around the silent warehouses. I rose early, my mind replaying Moore's tremulous whisper from the night before, "Meet me tomorrow, at the old warehouse by the silos. I'll tell you what I know. But come alone." It was the kind of invitation that carried both promise and peril. I dressed plainly, leaving my heavier coat and revolver in my lodging. A weapon can embolden recklessness, sometimes a clear mind and a sharp eye serve better than iron. Still, I slipped a small derringer into my waistcoat, for I knew too well that smugglers were not men of honor. The grain silos towered at the edge of Buffalo, great cylindrical shadows looming against the pale sky. Nearby, abandoned warehouses leaned crookedly over the canal, their windows gaping like broken teeth. The place stank of mildew and stale grain. As I approached, my footsteps echoed too loudly on the cobbles. The appointed warehouse stood half-sunken, one corner sagging toward the water. Its doors, warped by damp, gaped open just enough to permit entry. Inside, the dim light revealed stacked crates, rotting timbers, and a scatter of rat droppings. My ears caught the faint drip of water through the roof. "Moore," I called softly. "It is Pinkerton. I have come." A figure emerged from the shadows. The bowler hat was gone, replaced by disheveled hair plastered with sweat. Moore's eyes were wild, his hands twitching as though invisible threads pulled them. "You shouldn't have come," he muttered. "They'll see. They'll hear." "Then speak quickly," I said. "What became of Abernathy on the ferry? Did you kill him, or was it the others?" Moore flinched at the name, glancing over his shoulder as though it summoned ghosts. "I didn't kill him. I swear it. He wanted out. He wanted to take the profits and leave us to rot. They couldn't allow that. They said the lake would settle accounts." "And yet you carried his watch to a pawnbroker," I pressed. "Explain that." His face twisted with anguish. "They gave it to me. A token, they said. Proof that Abernathy was gone. Said I should pawn it, spread word he drowned. But I I don't know if he truly died. I never saw his body. The rope I had found, stained and discarded, flashed in my memory. Where was he taken? Moore pointed toward the canal. Here. This very warehouse. They dragged him in, bound, furious. He cursed them all, promised he'd ruin them if freed. They argued whether to kill him or keep him for ransom. By night's end, they hauled him out. After that, I don't know. His voice broke into a whisper. The lake keeps its bargains. That's what they say. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. Then you must give me names. Who were these men? But before he could answer, a sound split the silence, the creak of boards, the crunch of boots outside. Moore's face drained of color. They followed you, he hissed. Or me. It doesn't matter. We're both done. I drew my derringer, holding it low, and motioned him back. Shadows passed across the warped doorway. A moment later, 3 men entered, broad-shouldered, hard-eyed, each armed with clubs. They spread out like hunters cornering prey. Well, one sneered. The detective and the bookkeeper. Fortune favors us. Moore shrank against the crates, trembling. I straightened, keeping my voice calm. I am Allan Pinkerton. You know my name. You know what follows when harm comes to me. Step aside, and perhaps the law will show you mercy. They laughed, a sound without humor. The lake shows more mercy than the law. The first man lunged. I fired once, the crack deafening in the hollow warehouse. The shot grazed his arm, sending him sprawling with a curse. The others hesitated just long enough for me to grab Moore by the collar and drag him toward the canal side door. We burst into the pale daylight, sprinting along the planks. Behind us, shouts rang out, boots pounding in pursuit. Ahead, the canal opened wide, barges rocking gently at their moorings. I shoved Moore toward a narrow alley between silos. Run! I barked. Find safety. He stumbled off, vanishing into fog. I turned to face the pursuers. But to my surprise, none followed. They halted at the edge of the canal, watching me with cold satisfaction, as though patience served them better than blood. We'll find him again, one called. And when we do, he'll keep his bargain. Then they melted back into the mist, leaving me alone with the echo of their threat. I stood breathing hard, the derringer still warm in my hand. The encounter had yielded more than danger. I now knew Abernathy had been held in that warehouse, alive at least for a time. His fate afterward remained uncertain, but the smugglers' behavior confirmed they feared exposure more than my bullets. That night, I found Moore again, huddled in a cheap boarding house, shaking like a man pursued by demons. He clutched my sleeve, desperate. They'll kill me, Pinkerton. Just like him. Please, you must get me out. You'll be safe when you've given me everything, I replied. Names. Places. And most of all, the truth of Abernathy. Through trembling lips, he whispered 3 names, Cray, Donnelly, and Finch. Smugglers all, men with reputations blackened by years of contraband and violence. According to Moore, Abernathy had plotted to cheat them, to claim a shipment's profits for himself and flee with his wife. They discovered his plan, and in retaliation, seized him aboard the ferry. Was he killed? I demanded. Moore's eyes flickered. They argued. Cray wanted him dead. Finch said he was too valuable alive. I fled before they decided. That's all I know." He buried his face in his hands. "The lake keeps its bargains. It always does." I left him there, knowing his life hung by a fraying thread. My notes grew longer, yet certainty eluded me. Abernathy's disappearance was no mere accident. It was betrayal layered upon betrayal, with smugglers turning on their own and merchants straying into shadows. As I prepared for rest, one fact echoed louder than all: Abernathy's body had never been found. Until it surfaced, or until proof arose otherwise, the case remained open. The next step was clear: would confront the smugglers themselves, not in whispers or shadows, but directly, where their courage might falter. For in this city of grain silos and damp canals, the truth could not be hidden forever. Chapter 6: Fire on the Water. The night I chose to watch the smugglers was one of bitter chill, the sort that seeps through every layer of wool and into the marrow. Lake Erie lay black beneath the moon, its surface broken by shards of ice drifting from the river mouth. The warehouses along the Buffalo docks crouched like hulks, their broken windows glinting faintly. Somewhere among them, Cray, Donnelly, and Finch carried on their work, men whose names now burned in my notes as the architects of Silas Abernathy's fate. I set out alone, keeping to the shadows, a lantern hooded in my coat and my derringer in pocket. A detective must know when to step boldly into daylight, and when to let darkness cloak him. That night demanded silence. From the cover of a grain pile I watched. Along the pier, figures moved quickly, hauling barrels from a barge into a warehouse whose doors gaped like the maw of a cave. Lanterns swung from beams, casting long, jagged shadows. The men worked with practiced speed. 2 rolled barrels, one marked them with chalk, and another tall figure, Cray himself, I guessed, supervised with a voice sharp enough to cut the air. I edged closer, crouching behind a stack of timbers until I could hear snatches of speech. "Abernathy thought he'd bleed us dry," one man muttered. "Lake's got him now," another replied. Then Cray's voice, "No, you fool. The lake don't hold him. Not yet." Finch swore he'd kept him close until the books were right. I froze, pulse quickening. Could Abernathy still be alive? The idea struck like lightning. If Finch believed Abernathy worth holding, perhaps he had not met his death at all. The men argued further, their words broken by the scrape of barrels and the slap of ropes. Donnelly swore the merchant was a curse, insisting he be drowned. Finch countered that Abernathy knew too much of routes and buyers to waste. The dispute grew heated until a lantern tipped, spilling flame across straw. In an instant, chaos erupted. Fire licked upward, devouring dry grain sacks. Smoke billowed, choking the air. Men shouted, some racing for water buckets, others dragging barrels away. Cray barked orders, cursing as the flames spread. I used the confusion to slip closer. From a shadowed corner I watched Finch pull a smaller crate aside, revealing a trapdoor in the floor. He bent quickly, shouting into the darkness below. I caught only fragments, "Stay quiet, we'll move you after, damn the fire." My breath caught. Someone was hidden beneath that floor. Could it be Abernathy himself? But before I could act, the blaze roared higher. The men abandoned the trapdoor, rushing to save what cargo they could. The heat grew unbearable, smoke searing my lungs. I retreated into the alley as flames consumed the warehouse, sparks showering across the dock. The reflection of fire painted the black water crimson. From safety I observed the aftermath. Smugglers staggered away, faces blackened with soot, barrels abandoned. The trapdoor was swallowed in smoke and flame. Whether Abernathy, or some other prisoner, lay beneath, I could not tell. My chance to uncover the truth had gone up with the fire. When dawn came, only a skeleton of charred beams remained. City fire brigades had doused the worst, but much of the structure collapsed into the canal. Crowds gathered, whispering of smuggling, arson, and devilry. The authorities muttered about insurance fraud, but I knew better. Fire had been accident, not plan, and in its fury it had nearly revealed the heart of the mystery. I questioned a firefighter who swore he heard faint pounding beneath the floor as they fought the blaze. Yet when they pried up the scorched boards, no body lay within. Only a coil of rope and a half-burned chair remained. Later that morning, I tracked Cray and Donnelly to a riverside tavern where they drowned their fury in liquor. I did not enter but watched through a cracked shutter. They spoke with bitterness, blaming Finch for nearly losing the prize, and arguing whether Abernathy lived still. He should have been dropped in the drink, Donnelly spat. Now he'll haunt us till kingdom come. Cray slammed his fist. We'll finish it proper. Tonight, no arguments. The lake will have him. I left with a new certainty. Abernathy had survived the ferry, the warehouse, and even the fire. But his reprieve was short. His captors planned to end it once and for all. That evening I sought more, hoping to rouse him from his terror. I found him again in his boarding-house room, curtains drawn, hands shaking. At first he refused to listen, but when I described the fire, his eyes widened. They keep him alive because of the books, he whispered. Abernathy knows the routes, the contacts. Without him, they flounder. But Cray's patience runs thin. If they drown him, all his knowledge dies with him. Then we must move quickly, I pressed. Where would they take him? Moore hesitated, then said, the old canal lock, 2 miles east. They use it to sink what they don't want found. Bodies, barrels, anything. That night, armed with this knowledge, I took to the shadows once more. Lantern hooded, derringer loaded, I followed the towpath toward the lock. The moon shone fitfully through cloud, silvering the reeds and the water's edge. In the distance I heard the low murmur of men's voices, the scrape of oars. Creeping closer, I saw them, Cray, Donnelly, and Finch gathered at the lock, struggling with a heavy bundle wrapped in canvas. My heart surged. Bound within that canvas could be Abernathy himself, moments from a watery grave. Hold him steady, Cray growled. One push, and the lake takes its due. I raised my derringer, but hesitation stayed me. If I fired now, they might drop the bundle instantly, drowning the man I meant to save. I needed another way. At that instant, fate intervened. A constable's lantern appeared far down the towpath, swinging with the stride of an unsuspecting patrol. The smugglers cursed, hastily shoving the bundle aside and scattering into the reeds. I dashed forward, knife in hand, and slashed the canvas. Inside, half-conscious, bruised, but breathing, lay Silas Abernathy. His eyes fluttered open, confusion giving way to fear. "You're safe," I murmured, though I knew the words were premature. Behind me, Cray's voice roared from the dark, "Pinkerton. You meddling dog, this ain't finished." The night exploded with the sound of retreating footsteps, splashes, and curses. The smugglers had fled, but their vengeance remained. Fire had revealed the truth. Abernathy lived, yet his survival was a fragile thing, threatened by men who would not rest until silence was restored. As I hauled him to safety, the canal smoldering with lantern light and smoke still clinging to the sky, one thought burned clear: this case had not ended with a drowning. It had only begun with fire on the water. Chapter 7, the bargain unmasked. Silas Abernathy lay on the cot in my lodging, pale as ash, his wrists raw from ropes. I had pulled him from the canal's edge only hours before, the canvas still damp with the smuggler's attempt at a watery grave. He stirred fitfully, muttering half-coherent phrases of betrayal, money, and the lake. Though his body lived, his mind seemed half-drowned. I knew time was short. If I did not act, Cray and his men would finish what fire and water had failed to do. By dawn I sought out more. The bookkeeper was a wreck of a man, sleepless and trembling, yet still my one path toward clarity. I found him in his boarding house, curtains drawn tight, his bowler tossed forgotten upon the floor. At first he recoiled when I entered, certain assassins had come for him. "Calm yourself," I said. "Abernathy lives. For now." His eyes widened, and for a fleeting second relief crossed his face. Then it twisted into fear. "If he lives, they'll kill us all. Cray won't stop. Donnelly's worse. You don't understand, Abernathy made promises. He thought he could play us like children, cheat us out of barrels, keep profits for himself. But the others." I cut him short. "The others used you as well. Pawned him to silence suspicion, set you trembling while they drew blood. If you want to live more, you'll speak plainly. Every detail. Who gave the order? Who holds the books? Where do they meet?" He clasped his head in both hands, rocking slightly. "Finch," he whispered. "Finch keeps the books. He was the clever one. Cray only barks, Donnelly only breaks bones. Finch held the ledgers, the buyers, the routes. He said Abernathy was worth more alive until he gave up every code, every contact. After that, his voice trailed. After that, the lake." I pressed harder. "And now?" "They argue still," Moore said. "Finch wanted him to write down the routes, the cipher keys. Abernathy refused. He said he'd sooner drown. They kept him bound, half-fed, waiting for his will to. They kept him bound, half-fed, waiting for his will to crack. But Cray lost patience. He wanted it ended. Pieces began falling into place. Abernathy had been no innocent merchant swept into crime against his will. He had been willing partner, then betrayer, now pawn. Yet guilt or innocence mattered less than fact. Men still hunted him, and their quarrels could be turned against them. That afternoon I returned to Abernathy's side. His eyes were clearer, his voice steadier, though exhaustion weighed on him. "They tried to make me write," he croaked. "Tried to make me give them the codes. But I wouldn't. I thought, if I held out, they'd bargain, perhaps let me go." He gave a bitter laugh. "Fool's hope. They meant to kill me all along. Why keep the code secret?" I asked. He fixed me with a weary stare. "Because they meant life. As long as I held them, they kept me breathing. Once I yielded, I was as good as dead." It was ruthless logic, yet strangely admirable. He had bought himself time by gambling with knowledge. That evening I made a decision. To break this case, I must set trap for wolves and bait them with their own prey. I told Moore he would summon Finch to a parley, pretend he wished to strike a new bargain, that Abernathy had cracked at last, that the codes were ready to be delivered. Moore quailed. "They'll kill me if they suspect." "They'll kill you if they do not," I replied. "Better you stand with me, where at least one revolver guards your back." Reluctantly, he agreed. The meeting was arranged for midnight, in the ruins of the burned warehouse. It was a bold choice, but boldness often unsettles villains. By the light of a single lantern, Moore waited trembling beside me, rehearsing his lines. I told Finch I'd secured the papers. That Abernathy finally wrote them. They'll come. Oh, God, they'll come. And come they did. First Finch, calm and sharp-eyed, cloak drawn close. Then Cray and Donnelly behind, their brutish frames filling the doorway. Moore stammered, holding out a folded sheet I had prepared, innocent figures meant to resemble cipher. Finch snatched it, scanning with hungry eyes. So, he said softly, the merchant yielded. I knew he would. Where is he now? In safekeeping, I replied, stepping from shadow, derringer drawn. Alive. Which is more than you'll be if you move a step. Cray snarled, reaching for his club, but Finch raised a hand. Wait. This is Pinkerton. You think you can frighten us, detective? You've meddled too long. Perhaps, I said, but meddling has shown me truth. Abernathy plotted to cheat you, true. Yet you plotted to use him until he bled dry. None trusted the other, and so you turned to fire and rope. Tell me, Finch, how long before Cray grows tired of your cleverness? How long before Donnelly grows hungry for your share? My words struck home. Cray's face darkened, Donnelly shifted uneasily. Finch's eyes narrowed, the seed of suspicion planted. You'd set us against each other, Finch said. I need not, I replied. You already are. The silence stretched taut. At last Cray lunged toward Finch, bellowing, you lied. You said he was gone. Donnelly followed, fists raised. The warehouse erupted into chaos, men grappling, curses echoing off charred beams. I backed more toward the door, revolver steady, watching as wolves tore at each other. When at last Finch broke free, bloodied but breathing, he staggered toward me, gasping. He's yours, detective. Abernathy's yours. But you'll never prove a thing without him speaking. With that, he vanished into the night, leaving Cray and Donnelly snarling in pursuit. Moore collapsed beside me, shivering. You've doomed us all, he whispered. No, I said, though my voice held less certainty than I wished. I've unmasked their bargain. The law will finish the rest. Yet in truth, I knew the law lagged behind men such as these. Smugglers scattered like smoke. What I had was Abernathy alive, and with him, testimony enough to topple their network, if he chose to speak. Back at my lodging, I told Abernathy the outcome. He listened, eyes hollow, then said, You've saved me, Pinkerton. But you've also condemned me. If I speak, I am marked forever. If I stay silent, I am no better than they. The candle burned low between us, its light flickering over ledger pages and weary faces. The bargain was indeed unmasked, Abernathy's life, bought with silence or truth. Which path he would choose remained uncertain. And so the case deepened, not with answers but with peril. The lake had failed to keep its bargain, fire had failed to erase the witness, and men had turned on one another like rabid dogs. Yet I sensed the end drew near, for such tangled webs cannot hold forever. Chapter 8, The Case Without a Body. For 3 nights I scarcely slept. The names of Cray, Donnelly, and Finch rang in my ears like pistol shots, each one a fugitive shadow along Buffalo's alleys. Abernathy's survival, precarious as it was, had drawn a circle of danger about us all. My responsibility was no longer merely to unravel the truth, but to preserve a life that seemed as fragile as the flame of a candle in a gale. Moore, the trembling bookkeeper, disappeared the morning after our confrontation in the burned warehouse. Whether he fled in terror or was silenced by his former confederates, I cannot say. I searched the boarding houses, the taverns, the pawn shops, but found no sign. Some whispered of a man seen boarding a riverboat, hat pulled low, eyes darting. Others swore he was found floating near the canal, though no body was recovered. Thus the bowler-hatted man, whose shadow had loomed over this case from the beginning, passed into rumor. Abernathy, once his strength returned, begged me to secure passage for his wife and himself back to Detroit. "I'll face whatever awaits me there," he said, voice hoarse. Better honest shame than this half-life among smugglers and knives. Yet honesty did not come easily to him. When pressed for a full account of his dealings, he evaded, hedged, cloaked truth with half-phrases. I knew he carried secrets still, perhaps too dangerous to confess. Before allowing his departure, I insisted on one final attempt to bring Cray, Donnelly, and Finch to justice. With Abernathy's reluctant testimony, I filed depositions with the Buffalo police, urging swift arrest. Warrants were issued, but execution proved another matter. By the time constables moved, the warehouses lay empty, barges gone, footprints washed away by rain. The smugglers had melted into the countryside, or across the border into Canada. Their network, wounded but not destroyed, lived on in shadow. In truth, I had expected as much. Men of their breed are like smoke, strike, scatter, reform elsewhere. What remained to me was Abernathy himself, the one living witness, the one surviving piece of proof. Yet even that felt tenuous. On the evening of his departure, I walked with him to the ferry slip. The crescent star loomed at the pier, her decks crowded with passengers bound for the opposite shore. It was upon this very vessel, weeks earlier, that Abernathy had vanished like a coin dropped in water. Now he returned, pale but upright, his wife clutching his arm as though afraid he might yet be stolen away. "Mr. Pinkerton," she said, tears brimming, "you have given me back my husband. For that I owe you more than words." I inclined my head, though in my heart doubt lingered. The man beside her was not the same Silas Abernathy who had boarded that ferry. Shadows clung to him still, secrets unsaid, bargains struck in silence. Whether he had truly repented of his dealings, or merely survived them, I could not judge. As the gangway was raised, I pressed Abernathy once more. "Remember, sir, silence may shield you, but it also shields those who sought your death. One day the law will catch them. When it does, your voice may be the difference between their freedom and their fall." He gave a weary nod. "Perhaps. But for now, let the lake keep its secrets. I have had my fill of them." The whistle shrieked, the ferry pulled from dock, and in moments he was gone, vanishing into mist as before. Only this time, I had watched him leave. In my report, I recorded the case as unresolved. Evidence pointed strongly toward conspiracy among the smugglers, with Abernathy as both accomplice and victim. Yet no body had been produced, no final confession made, no culprits brought to trial. The ledger pages, half burned and half deciphered, remained the strongest proof, but without Abernathy's sworn word they were little more than curiosities of trade. Thus the file bore a title I have used rarely, "Case Without a Body." For though I pulled the man himself from the brink of death, his truth remained as absent as if the lake had swallowed him whole. In time, whispers arose of Abernathy seen again, some said in Canada, arranging new ventures, others claimed he lived quietly in Ohio, under another name. Still others swore he drowned after all, that the man I saved was only a phantom conjured by smoke and fear. Such contradictions are the marrow of detective work. What I know with certainty is this: men who trade in secrets often become prisoners of them. Abernathy, Moore, Cray, Finch, Donnelly, all were ensnared by bargains with the lake, bargains of silence and betrayal. Whether they lived or died mattered less than the truth that slipped always from grasp, like water through fingers. As I closed the report, I thought of Mrs. Abernathy's eyes, hopeful yet haunted, and of the splash O'Rourke swore he heard that first night on the ferry. Perhaps Abernathy was meant to vanish forever, claimed by water and silence. Perhaps fate had allowed him one reprieve. But in the end, his case left me with no clean resolution, only shadows on the docks, a burned warehouse, and a ledger filled with half-deciphered marks. I have solved murders, foiled conspiracies, unmasked assassins. Yet some cases resist finality. They linger, like the smoke of burned timber or the ripple of a vanished body. The disappearance at Midnight Ferry was such a case. True, I drew a man from the canvas and spared him the weight of stones, but whether I saved Silas Abernathy or only prolonged his shadow, I cannot say. As detectives, we pride ourselves on truth. But truth is a slippery fish, darting through murk, glimpsed only in flashes. Sometimes we haul it into daylight. Other times, it slides back into the lake, leaving only the echo of splashes in the dark. And so, with heavy hand, I wrote the final line in my notebook. No body, no certainty. Only whispers, ledgers, and shadows. Case closed, yet unresolved.